Hey friends, welcome back to Soul Nourishment. I'm Mal. This is my friend Heather. We're both intuitive tarot readers. Heather is an Ayurvedic practitioner, and I'm a professional astrologer. And we get together maybe once a season to talk about what we like to call soul nourishment. And Heather has been teaching me a lot about Ayurvedic philosophy over the past couple years. And a really important part about Ayurvedic philosophy is the transitioning between the seasons. So, this is when our energy might actually get a little bit more haywire than usual. And if you live in the Northern Hemisphere, we're currently transitioning from winter to spring. So that's kind of our theme for today. The winter to spring transition. But Heather, do you have any like inklings about, yeah, why is this transition really hard, like sometimes on our mental and spiritual and physical bodies? Give us like the Ayurvedic perspective on this transition.
So the Cliff Note version, because I could probably talk about this for like 3 hours, but the Cliff Note version is for those who don't know, in Ayurveda we have three doshas, and Ayurveda really just comes down to the elements and energetics. And so every human, every living being embodies the doshas, which are the elements, right? Air, ether, fire, water, and earth. And during winter, each season is reflective of a dosha. And during winter, we are in Vata season, and late winter, we start to transition out of Vata into Kapha season or Kapha dosha. And so if we look at the elements of the doshas, Vata dosha is air and ether. And if we can think about, well, what are the characteristics of air and ether element? Cold, mobile, unpredictable, rough, ungrounded. And if we think about the elements of Kapha dosha, we have earth and water, heavy, stable, grounding, building, inert. And so when we're in a season, we are experiencing the elements of that dosha, right? Winter is very cold, it's very dark, very ungrounding. There's a lot of wind, a lot of movement. And so we need the opposite energies or elements of Kapha dosha during Vata season to keep us grounded. So we need that earth and water element, that heaviness, and we also need some warmth, right? We need warmth from Pitta dosha as well. So during Vata season, we're kind of building Kapha dosha energy within our bodies to try and stay grounded, stay warm, stay balanced. But as we start to transition out of Vata season into Kapha season, we're carrying all that heavy, inert energy that we've built during Vata season to survive into Kapha season. So now we've got Kapha season where the predominant elements are earth and water and heavy and inert, and we're carrying all of that same energy that we built up during Vata season into Kapha, and it can make us feel really heavy, sluggish, depressive, not just in our thoughts, but just in our overall spiritual energy. We might have a harder time connecting to higher consciousness or higher self, however you want to look at that. We might be unmotivated. We might just kind of feel like a slug, like we just want to continue to hibernate, when in reality, what we need to is to start to come out of hibernation. And what do animals do when they come out of hibernation? They start moving more. They start connecting more with nature. They are reaching for foods that are seasonal. They're starting to eat the seasonal foods that are starting to sprout and grow around them. And so they're inviting the opposite qualities of what they had during hibernation. And so that's really kind of the synopsis of seasonal change in Ayurveda. And it manifests as like your digestion can start to feel really wonky, your sleep can be wonky, your thoughts and your mind and your clarity can start to feel foggy. Your connection with spirit or desire to kind of tune in and drop in with spirit or higher consciousness can kind of ebb and flow or fade or feel less sort of easy to connect during this time. But there are ways to counteract that and to stay balanced, which we can get into a little bit, but that's sort of the synopsis.
No, that helps me as like a semi student of Ayurveda, like just kind of imagining, okay, it makes sense. Yes, in Vata season, we're cold, we're airy, we're full of like ether energy. So obviously we need those kapha qualities to keep us grounded, like the earth and the heaviness. But then now spring, we are entering kapha season. So
Yeah.
we kind of need to start to shed some of those energies. And you know what it reminds me of? Like dogs or wolves who have fur coats. Like
Yes.
they grow their fur coats
Mhm.
during Vata season because they need the extra weight and warmth. But then there's probably a period of time, maybe the first couple weeks of the transition from winter to spring, where that animal is really uncomfortable because they're wearing their winter coat
Yeah.
in this like new springtime environment.
Mhm.
So we may be also kind of metaphorically dealing with our emotional winter coat, our physical winter coat, our not to body shame at all, but our spiritual winter coat. We're like kind of shedding that, and
Mhm.
it's uncomfortable to shed that. And I think that's why this particular seasonal transition, as much as I love it becoming warmer, it it does mess with me, I think.
Yeah. It's funny because I was going to ask you if you had a metaphor. I was going to say like what metaphor, and I was going to use the bear, the bear analogy of like in the summer, the bear is just living its best life and eating all the yummy, abundant foods that are seasonal. And then it's got to have all that heavy fur and heavy fat to protect itself and survive the darkness and the coldness and the mobile qualities of winter. But it's cozy and it's been comfortable and like warm in its little den with all this extra layers, right? And it can, like you said, it's so uncomfortable. You get to spring and you have to like put yourself out there when you've been kind of hibernating and in your little cave in your shell. And now you're being asked to emerge and to shed those layers. And a lot of times I think for those in, well, especially like the northern hemisphere where there's a lot of dark during winter, not a lot of light, you kind of settle into the darkness, and getting used to the light and the warmth again is definitely a transition emotionally, physically, and spiritually of coming out of that little kind of cavernous cocoon of safety that we create for ourselves during winter.
Yeah, totally. And I'm wondering, um, what are some ways that you have supported yourself through this season? And also, like, what do we actually maybe tend to reach for during this transition that actually might not help? Because I'm thinking like, okay, if we're transitioning into kapha season and we're trying to shed a little bit of that kapha energy, I'm thinking like, okay, so like we're gonna want to reach for like the heavier foods and like cuddle ourselves up in a blanket and just like kind of be sloths.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not the best use of moving the energy of these next couple weeks to a month.
Oh, totally. Well, it's funny because I think one of the easiest ways to understand Ayurveda is the statement like increases like and opposites balance. So when we're in a season, we may feel like if we're feeling like we don't want to put ourselves out there, we're not ready to transition, we might want the cozy blanket, we might want the couch time, we might want the really heavy grounding foods, but all of those things are literally reflective of kapha energetics. And so if we are spending all of our time doing those things, not to say that we still shouldn't build in time for rest and build in time for cozy, but we are increases like we're increasing the qualities of kapha, which just kind of snowballs and manifests as more of that heavy kapha energy. So what we can do is we can start to make, we never want to change our practices and our seasonal foods and all of that in one day, because that's a shock to the nervous system. We don't, when people are like, I'm going to change my diet 100%, quit cold turkey this and just change it all tomorrow. Like that's never a good idea, because we're going to shock our digestive system, nervous system. And so I think if you look at the energetics of kapha, earth and water, literally, like the best analogy is like mud. So in the early spring, what do we see out in the northern hemisphere, right? We see a lot of snow melting and heavy mud, and it's just kind of unctuous and sort of slow. And so we can start to think like, well, what's the opposite of that? A little lighter, a little drier, a little warmer movement. A mudslide moves really slowly. So we want to bring in, maybe during the winter, we were doing movement practices that were really slow and kind of grounding and intuitive. Now maybe we're going to go for a brisk outside walk where we pick up the pace a little bit, or we feel like hopping on our bike and breaking a sweat. Or instead of doing like interpretive slow dance, we're going to turn up the beats and like do some Zumba and break a sweat or something. So it's really like, and in the kitchen, we can start to increase our spices a little bit. So, I mean, spices are great all year round. In the summer, we can back off our pungent spices because of pitta season being fire and water. But in the spring, especially, we can invite ginger and cinnamon and nutmeg, and even, maybe a little bit of garlic and onion, some foods that are a little bit more pungent, to counteract the cool nature of kapha, because our digestion can slow down a lot too this time of year, or just be kind of wonky, and pungency moves things. So adding some pungency in your foods and some warmth in your foods, staying away from foods that don't feel intuitively yummy right now. So like for me, a raw cold salad sounds not great, because I need some warmth and I need some pungency. And then also thinking about your environment, like where are you inviting warmth in your environment and heat in your environment? Taking warm baths, getting in the sauna if you have access to a sauna, literally building heat in your body through sweat, like I mentioned earlier. Those opposite qualities that are warming, light, dry, movement, all those things are great for kapha.
Yeah. Okay. I relate to this a lot. Yeah. Cause there's like, there's sometimes there's a tendency, I think, when we're feeling like that emotional, mental, physical sluggishness. I mean, sometimes it's hard to be proactive about inviting the good stuff into like our energy, and it's sometimes hard to be proactive when it comes to shifting our energy along with the season. I don't know about you, but I feel like and this is a testament to my current spiritual path, but like I resist seasonal changes, and maybe that's because I tend to run very vata in general. So
Yeah.
just in general, the seasonal change, like once we get into the middle of the season, I'm fine.
Yeah.
But it's the transitionary period that I just want to hide away from
Yeah.
sometimes. But now I'm getting some ideas like, yeah, like I might actually enjoy a little bike ride. I haven't been on my bike in like about 5 months now, so that would actually be something that I would enjoy, and something that might shake some of that kapha energy out of the system.
Yeah. Well, and it's even like, I find myself too, that like increases like concept, especially when we're feeling very slothy and very lethargic. It can be hard intuitively to know, is this something that my body really needs right now? Does it really need the rest and the lethargy? Or is it just like increasing, like increasing, like increasing, like? So you really have to tune in. And you can even test the water a little bit. Like if you're feeling like, I just want to be a sloth, I need the lethargy today, but it's really just the seasonal change in kapha energy just kind of holding you down. Try something small. Go take a warm bath, like a warm, hottish bath or hot shower, and see if you feel more invigorated, because that heat will counteract that coolness and that lethargy. Or instead of drinking a cool drink or a cold water, make yourself some spicy tea that has like cinnamon or ginger in it, and see if that warmth in your digestive system kind of brightens you up a little bit. Or hop on the bike and just test the waters a little bit and see, because if your body really needs rest, hopping on your bike afterwards and during, if you still feel lethargic and tired, then the bike ride wasn't the right choice. But if you feel sort of invigorated afterwards and clearer headed, then you know it was the right choice. So you can kind of experiment a little bit, and don't ever feel bad if your experimentation like wasn't the right choice. But I think that's how we build connection to our bodies intuitively, physically, mentally, and spiritually, is that we have to test the waters and see if the opposite qualities are really what we needed to balance. Because I know for myself, some days I do really just need the rest, but other days I can usually tell, because it's an association of like lethargy in the body, but also very much spiritually and mentally. It's like a combination of all three, where usually if my body just needs rest, I still feel clear-headed. But if it's a combination of all three, I'm like, okay, we've got some like heavy kapha energy hanging out, so I need to go sweat in the bathtub, or I need to do like a more vigorous yoga flow, or make some pungent tea or something, and then I usually feel a lot better.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's actually very clarifying
Yeah.
when it comes to, yeah, telling the difference between different kinds of lethargy.
Yeah.
Because I do know that feeling. Like you do
Yeah.
know that feeling where you're like, um, I'm really, really tired. I wish I could do something right now, but I just like need to listen to my body. And then there's like a different kind of tired where it's like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I can't think, like I'm in a fog
Yeah.
of like fatigue.
Yeah.
That might be a signal that, yeah, the kappa energetics have taken over and it's time to kind of loosen up a little bit with that.
Totally. And I think the beauty of kapha is it's so great at, it's the builder of all the doshas. It builds tissues. It's the nourisher and sort of the nurturer of all the doshas. It provides that container of like comfort, safety, grounded. But when we have too much kapha energy or kapha imbalance, especially after vata season, it does create that like foggy mind, that heavy mind, the heavy body. And you'd be surprised at how well it responds to small, safe adjustments and tweaks to our daily routine. Like we never need to shock our system, but if we just, you know, switch up our spices or add a little bit more spices and make sure we're eating warming foods throughout the day, we're not, inviting too much coolness in our diet, or in our daily practices, and we're sweating a little bit more, like we'll notice a huge shift in how we feel. And our digestion really, really can take a toll during seasonal shifts. And then our digestion directly connects to like our brain function. So that's why a lot of the times it can be like digestion feels funky, brain feels funky, mind feels funky, and then we can't connect to spirit, because I feel like when we don't have the mind and the body functioning properly, like there's nothing left to be able to connect to higher consciousness or spirit.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me, Heather. And do you have any maybe I don't know if maybe is applicable to your own life right now with like your current spiritual practice, or even like self-care or self-nourishment kind of practices that might actually be good to bring in if it feels good during this transition? Because I'm thinking it is, because kappa is heavy, it's not the most motivating sort of it's not the most motivating energy. And
It's very
although
resistant to change.
Resistance.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So maybe it's like spiritual practices or emotional practices that help, go with the flow instead
yeah,
of resisting change.
yes,
What do you think about that?
yes. I think yes to that. I personally, and also know from my studies, that yes, our spiritual practices should also shift as well. And there are small things that you can do that help combat that resistance to change or that heaviness of kapha that kind of can make things feel more difficult. And one of them, physically, that we can do, a physical practice, is to dry brushing is one that's great that actually moves energy and stimulates. So during Vata season, self massage with oil or abhyanga is sort of standard. And during Kapha season, really only for those who feel, if you feel intuitively it sounds good, because for people who have Vata imbalance, dry brushing can actually be too invigorating and too mobile. But you can test it out and see how you feel. But that dry brushing, the stimulation and the movement of it being a little bit faster can kind of help lift some of the heaviness and invite movement in the body. As far as like spiritual practices go, I think if you can invite the elements of fire into your spiritual practices, however that looks, whether you do some sort of spell work around fire, using fire, building a bonfire outside, and then within that spell or whatever, however you want to call it, that ritual, I think it would be a great opportunity because of the resistance to change to reflect mentally and spiritually on what you are resisting or things that are weighing heavily on you emotionally that you've accumulated in the last few months and allow the fire to help kind of cleanse that. And so that could look like a lot of different things. Some people like to write things and burn them. That's a pretty standard traditional thing. Um, for me personally, I like to just light candles and visualize and speak out what needs to be released. I don't necessarily like write it and then burn it. But I think the practice of, first of all, identifying, because I think a lot of times we don't actually really know what we're holding on to emotionally and spiritually. So, first, identifying what it is that you're resisting or that you're holding on to that's heavy, and then inviting the element of fire into that somehow to help kind of transmute and burn it away, if that makes sense.
Oh, it's funny because I usually like kind of make light of this sort of like write all your shit down and burn
Yeah,
it, like because
yeah,
I do think it's I do think typically sometimes it's a little bit like spiritual bypassy or sometimes,
yes,
but I will say the minute you said that, it really clicked with me. I was like,
okay,
I haven't done that in a while
yeah,
and I'm feeling it now. Like I
yeah,
actually feel like in this case, it does not feel spiritually bypassy to me. I'm like, all right, I do need to write some things down
yeah,
and burn them,
yeah.
and maybe that would be helpful to me.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I was careful the way I said that because I feel like people are going to be like, well, they say that they're supposed to do that, or everybody says to do that on the full moon or the new moon or blah blah
Right.
blah. Like I feel like maybe it's over prescribed. Maybe that's why I was hesitant to say it, but it doesn't have to be that. It can just be you're meditating on it and you're visualizing it getting burned and released, or you're visualizing it throwing it down to a volcano and the lava incinerates it. Like however it works for you to invite the element of fire around the spiritual blocks and maybe the resistance and the heaviness, emotional baggage that we are carrying. Because in Ayurveda, when we think about what we digest, it's not just food. We literally, whatever we're taking in emotionally, spiritually, or actually like food, dietary, if we're not digesting it and releasing it, it becomes ama, which is the word for toxins. We can have emotional ama, we can have spiritual ama, we can have digestive ama. And spiritual and emotional ama or toxins manifest just the same way that digestive do. It causes mental disruption, mental imbalances, emotional imbalances, physical imbalances. And so being able to release our emotional and spiritual ama, especially during seasonal change, is just as important as digestive. Um, so for myself personally, you know, those of you who have maybe heard me talk about this before, I apologize, but like years ago, before I discovered Ayurveda and my witchy spiritual practices and everything, I had about as much emotional and spiritual ama that anyone could probably hold on to. And it was manifesting itself as literally I was breaking out in hives every other day, and I wasn't eating foods I was allergic to. And my skin was breaking out. I wasn't sleeping. It just anxiety, all the things were happening. And I hadn't changed my diet. I was still eating the same foods. I was not treating my body and nourishing my body with food, but I know it wasn't a manifestation of just the food I was eating. It was the emotional and spiritual ama as well. So just to have awareness around the fact that those things are just as important to visit and to address and to take care of as like the physical body, because they're all so interconnected.
That astrologically makes a lot of sense to me
Hmm.
as well, just because the season that we're kind of alluding to, Kappa season, it's kind of taken place during Pisces season and Aries season. So like, yeah, end of winter, early spring. And Pisces, a lot of people who astrology students probably know this, but just in case you're not familiar with how like the order of the astrological signs, Pisces is known as like the 12th sign, so the final sign before the cycle repeats again with the first sign of Aries. So like it's almost this we are in a little bit of this limbo of Pisces season, helping us maybe emotionally work through certain things that we've maybe needed to release in the winter time, and maybe we've been sitting with a certain pain or like a certain trauma or a certain unresolved emotional difficulty throughout the winter. Pisces season is great for transmuting that and releasing that
Yes.
and having like a catharsis with that energy. But also Aries season being the season that follows Pisces season. Aries is the first cardinal fire sign.
Yeah.
So we have we go from water to fire. We go from like heaviness to like igniting something new. But in order to do that in Aries season, there's probably some, combing through that is happening, right now as we transition in the last couple weeks to a month of winter.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point too, because I think that astrologically, the energetics of astrology are also seen in Ayurveda because they're both ancient sciences, and ancient science is all based on the elements and energetics. And so I think that it's very easy to see how they intertwine. And with Pisces being water and that coolness of water, the fire of Aries coming in, like I was talking about, inviting the element and fire and lessons of Aries is just as important as the lessons of that Pisces bring, and the container that Pisces provides for addressing the emotional baggage that we may have collected during the winter time. And the winter, it provides that container where we're in this container of sort of self solitude or emotional solitude, where a lot of times that's where the baggage kind of comes out. In spring and summer, historically as humans, it's planting time and farming time and harvesting time, and you're busy, 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 and you're creating and you're manifesting and you're producing, and there isn't that time to settle in and feel into the emotional baggage, which is where I think that's why it comes out so much in winter. And then we have to make sure we give it space to be released as we transition. Otherwise, it becomes that ama, the toxins that just fester.
Yeah. So this feels like, yeah, an interesting like focus on not only inviting more fire, but inviting more fire. We're kind of transmuting that ama that you're
Yeah.
speaking to, which is going to be some good energy, I think, by the time we get to spring.
Yep.
And that's why like the birds are chirping and the animals are all out to play like in spring, like
Yeah.
our energy can kind of be like that in a way too, but we have to allow this sort of transmutation of that Pisces Aries kind of transition to happen.
Yep.
I'm wondering, Heather, when it comes to, now I'm thinking about the tarot cards, and
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to pull a card, but I'm also kind of interested, like what card in general maybe has been coming to you lately, or even maybe a card that feels like good advice when it or guidance when it comes to maybe moving through this particular season.
Yeah. Okay, so wand the wands, obviously. I'm thinking like Eight of Wands, very action-oriented movement. Um, you know, I think taking the wands have some good lessons in confronting things. They teach us to not be afraid to feel into confrontation. And I'm not saying like to get into arguments or fights with people, but I mean to confront where we are, and to not be afraid to confront the emotional ama or the spiritual ama, and then to kind of move forward and take action. And with the wands having that fire energy, obviously, I think that I've pulled the Eight of Wands a couple times in the last few weeks. And for me, it really resonated because I feel like I'd kind of been dragging my feet with some things and just having that sort of like resistance to change. Um, or even having fear of change. I think that's also very much a kappa manifestation, is fear of change, wanting to stay in what's comfortable. And so I think Three of Wands too is good for envisioning where you want to go this spring, because spring does allow for so much opportunity for manifestation of like you've been ruminating on where you want to go, or you have this image of where you want to go, but you can't take action during winter and vata season. But during kapha season, you have the opportunity to plant those seeds, right? If we're using the analogy of like farming, right? Or being an herbalist, you're planting the seeds of and you can visualize and see by the end of the season what the fruits of your labor are going to be. And so maybe even like there's some Seven or Eight of Pentacles in there as well. I don't know. What do you feel?
Yeah. Well, I do have a tarot card in mind, but what you just said also reminded me of like how like Ayurveda and a lot of things we talk about in these soul nourishments kind of relate back to like the more animalistic state of humans, and like how we maybe acted before technology and before agriculture and all of that pre-agricultural human times. And
Yeah.
I'm also thinking about like the movement. Well, like if you were like cooped up in your house all winter living off of what you basically like preserved,
Mhm.
at the first sight of snow melting and like things warming up a little bit, you are, for survival's sake, you're gonna want to go and go find some berries, or like
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
fine, we're gonna try to now go out, be more active, replenish the food supply that was used up in winter. this is kind of making sense with the Eight of Wands. Like it is
Yeah,
reminding me of like the not only intuitive, but almost like animalistic knowing. Like we know as animals when it's time to move. Like
yeah,
sometimes it's not safe to stay in the same
yeah,
place
yeah.
for a while, you know.
Mhm. Totally,
Um,
totally.
and
Oh,
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Sorry.
No, no, you didn't finish that. Go ahead. I'm
Well,
gonna pull a card though because I'm just inspired. So you keep talking and I'll pull a card.
well, and I was thinking like it's funny that I have been pulling the Four of Swords, which is kind of like the opposite of the Eight of Wands, but not really because the Four of Swords is almost about coming to clarity about the action we want to take. And I think there's also this invitation for a little bit of stillness before we act too hastily or rashly. Like it's a little bit like, okay, there needs to be some sort of mental clarity that happens so I can, leave whatever behind or and to kind of
Yeah,
move forward with my actions. So that has been a card that feels like an important side character to the Eight of Wands.
I think that is perfect because I think also pulling it back Ayurvedically, we can't, like I was saying, you can't just go gung ho, changing all your routines and all your foods all at once, all your practices. That's a shock to the nervous system. We need to feel into and check in with ourselves first of like, what really do we need intuitively before we take action? Because, I always tell my clients who I work with that I'm going to give you this wellness plan, but I want you to take each practice and experiment with it. And if it doesn't feel intuitively aligned, if it's not making you feel better, then try this one instead. So, we have to remember that we are all just such unique individuals that require attunement, but attunement takes checking in instead of just acting first, right? In order to properly attune, we have to check in before we take action. So,
Ooh,
yeah,
yes, the attunement,
yeah,
the internal
yes,
attunement before the external Eight of Wands moving into more alignment.
there
That's,
you
I
go.
think, what it
We
is.
nailed it.
We got it. We got
We
it.
kn- we if you didn't know, Mal and I tend to operate on the same energetic level at all times. So we usually come up with some good stuff. But I did want to say that the Seven of Pentacles was at the bottom of my deck, which I mentioned, right? And then
That card came out in my week ahead spread. So
did it,
that's been a card coming to me too. So please give us
yeah.
your intuitive knowledge about that card.
Okay, and then but the Knight of Swords was the card that came out, which I think is great because it came out right when what did you say? You said something about our thoughts need to be aligned or something.
Like we need to be internally aligned in order to be like externally aligned, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and so I
And
think I
it
think I think the
comes
Knight of Swords is a good lesson for that of how to really align and get clear on your thoughts because a lot of times I think with the Knight of Swords we can have like there's this expectation of like clarity of thought or that you are going to arrive at where you want to be mentally or like it almost feels like you're reaching for the right thought or you're asking your brain like please just give me the answer, but in this case scenario um i think the I think with and also with kapha dosha the fogginess of mind is so apparent with kapha dosha where we really feel like my brain is so foggy when kapha is imbalanced and I just can't arrive at where I want to be mentally. And so I think the Knight of Swords is a reminder of um, inviting those opposite qualities to kind of clear up that headspace a little bit to allow clarity of thought to come in. Which is also interesting because this card has like the clouds parting in the imagery, kind of like showing like the clearing of space and the clearing of that fog, so to speak. And good old Seven of Pentacles. this card really stalked me a lot last year around this time. And that's when I was developing my first Ayurvedic course, which I think, so I think it really aligns a lot with like the beginning of spring and Kapha season of like, what did you really work on during Vata season, or what did you really develop and want to manifest and plant as we go into Kapha season? Because we have been in our little cocoon and container to protect ourselves from the harshness of Vata season all winter, which provides that space of either emotional baggage coming out, but also space to, Vata is a very creative, very ethereal dosha. They are the ones, if you have like a group project and you've got all the doshas on the team, Vatas are the one who are going to come up with the idea, but they're going to have a hard time executing. They're going to have a hard time following through, but they're the ones who come up with the $1 million idea that no one else thought of because they're so creative. So what $1 million idea did you come up with during Vata season that now with the energy of Kapha that's more stable, grounded, and sure of what they want, how can you execute on that and actually follow through? That's really a Seven of Pentacles kind of energy for me, and that creativity of Vata, where it's like there's all these $1 million ideas, but then you have to follow through with the next cards that follow the Seven of Pentacles. It's not like telling you like, yeah, it's coming. You have to follow through and execute. So Kapha season and spring provides us that time and the space. It provides us the soil and the ground and the nourishment of the earth to kind of bring it to fruition.
Definitely. It feels very like Saturnian, like the correct course of action and the self-discipline is needed in order to manifest these goals or these steps or these aligned actions. So that feels good. Well, Heather, I feel full. I feel like we just provided like a really good mini guide to transitioning with the seasons. Do you have anything at this point you want to kind of shout out to anybody who's still watching?
No, I would just say, I would emphasize again, like increases like, opposites balance, and think light, warm, a little bit drying, a little bit less, unctuous and oily and watery, in all of your practices and how you nourish yourself as you move into spring. And always go back to what feels good. If you try something and it doesn't feel good, that's okay. It doesn't mean it was meant to be. What about you?
Yeah, no, I think that feels good to me too. And I feel like this just this interesting trust kind of re-entering my heart, like trusting in the timing, trusting in the fact that the discomfort of transitioning in these seasons will not last forever.
Yep.
And also, I like the sort of going back to Seven of Pentacles. You're working on your reboot of your Ayurvedic class. And I'm working on rebooting some of my tarot and astrology classes soon. So look out for that in the spring if you are, especially if you're feeling into these Ayurvedic kind of philosophies, if you find them interesting.
Yeah, that's so funny because I feel like in the winter, I wasn't called to reboot the class, but now that we're on the cusp of this transition, you and I are both like, we're ready to reboot it and to have it be planted in the soil. So yeah, stay tuned for that. We're
Exactly.
excited.
Cool. Well, you can find all of our information down in the show notes. You can join our newsletters or DM us on Instagram for a little bit more information. And thank you so much for watching. Let us know how your transition from winter to spring is going in the comments below.
Sounds good. Take care, you guys. Thank you.
Bye.